Hello, everyone. I'm going to start just so that we can uh, move quickly through today's panel. My name is Ellen. I am the co-executive director of Hollywood Fringe. My pronouns are she, they. As a visual description for anybody who's blind or low vision, or maybe not watching the YouTube at this point or the Zoom recording, I'm a white woman. I have brown bangs. I'm wearing a white sweater. I'm wearing a necklace with a eye on it, and I'm in front of a white wall with a blue art piece behind me. I do want to consent to everybody that we are recording today's event, and it's also being live streamed. That being said, there's going to be some work that's done in breakout rooms later, and all of those things will not be live streamed. Those will all be private and separate, and the live stream will just see the main room, which is for you watching on the live stream. Whatever's happening in those Zoom rooms, I'm going to do with you on the live stream slash the recording. That's the name. That's the word that I was searching for. I was searching for recording. Um, so thank you all so much for being here. Before we begin, I want to do a land acknowledgement. The Hollywood Fringe acknowledges that we are on the unceded lands of the Tongva, Quiche, Gabrielinos, and Gabrielinos peoples. A land acknowledgement is our formal statement that recognizes and honors the indigenous peoples of the land we presently reside and work on. Our statement serves as a practice as we commit to furthering our connection to Indigenous communities, past, present, and emerging. Today's event is a new program, and it's one that we're piloting out. So we'll be dropping a feedback form at the chat for an anonymous or not so anonymous feedback session. And we'll also specifically have time for questions along the way. But otherwise, we're going to try and stay on topic. And there's going to be Wiley, who is going to give a little Zoom wave, Wiley, and Lois on the chat are two Fringe staffers who are here. If you need to DM anyone during this, if you want to have any private conversation, you can DM either of them, and it'll be great. So why are we here? We are centering anti-racism practices through an understanding of our individual and collective personal stake in ending white supremacy and creating truly radically accessible and inclusive spaces in American theater. That's a lot to do in 2 hours, and I'm promising you that we're not going to solve that today. But it is these things that have these small steps that help bring us towards that collective liberation. What's going to happen? We're going to go through some introductions, the terms, a breakout room conversation, some writing prompts, and then a formal panel discussion. And there's going to be time for Q&A throughout the call. I'd love if everybody could grab a pen or a pencil or some writing utensil, whatever you use, as well as a notebook for a little bit later on. We're going to have like a moment for everybody to reflect. And if you want to use your phone or a digital resource as well, please feel free to do that. There's going to be a BIPOC affinity space facilitated by our Access Committee that will happen during the festival at Fringe Central to help support that community, the BIPOC community, and building community together, and also giving some feedback to Hollywood Fringe if you would want to, which we also have for everybody who participates, and we'll make some announcements about that later on. Okay, I am not reading my script. Let me read my script again. There we go. Before I get started, I want to introduce tonight's facilitators. And if my amazing facilitators could give your name, your pronouns, and as well as a visual description for everyone. And I'm going to pick on Lex to go first.
Hi, y'all. I am Lex Ryan. My pronouns are they or he. I am a white trans person. I have short brown hair, and there's a whole room behind me with some plants and a mirror. And I'll pass it over to Jay Stephen.
Thanks, Lex. My name is Jay Stephen. People also call me Slim. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a white cis guy with a ginger and gray beard wearing a flannel shirt in a white room.
Emma.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emma Irene. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white woman with shoulder length brunette hair. I'm wearing headphones and a black sweatshirt. And behind me is a curtain and a blind because this blind fell down.
I'm going to give a little introduction as to like why this came about. So last year, we've always had anti-racism training since our Access Committee tapped us to do that for our participants in 2020. And so we've had anti-racism training for all of our festivals since then. And last year, one of the conversations that came up was how much work the BIPOC community was doing in our community to educate white people about racism and about anti-racist practices. And we were tapped to try and find white facilitators that could help make sure that we're bridging the gap and be able to build community together. And then last year is so cool. Emma and I met at organizing at White People for Black Lives in 2020. And I was at a town hall and I was like, oh my gosh, Emma, hi. And we started to talk about these like kind of intersections between Fringe and all of the theater communities that are also talking a lot about anti-racism work. And we decided to do this panel. And so I really am so grateful to Emma for giving that. But I would love if every panelist could give maybe like a 3-sentence bio about like how you came to this work before we get started. And then we'll do a grounding exercise right after that. I'm going to bug Emma to go first because you went last time.
I came into this work in 2020. I moved to Los Angeles in late 2019, but I'm originally from Minnesota and I lived in Minneapolis for 10 years. So when George Floyd was killed in 2020, it felt very personal because my community that I had been a part of for so long was deeply hurting and I was far away. And of course, there was also a pandemic. So I sought community here because I also realized I didn't have any yet, and found White People for Black Lives, which is an organization with Aware LA, and showing up for racial justice, and started learning about anti-racist work and how I can apply that to my everyday life and organizing and getting other white folks involved. Is that sufficient?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, cool. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Colin Lex, go backwards.
Yeah, I am also part of White People for Black Lives. I joined in the sort of whirlwind of Trump times in 2016 before the election. And that's been my political home since. I have also started, doing some organizing elsewhere, but I always think of this, sort of white anti-racist work and identity development as like a home base to sort of bring everywhere else that I go. I think it applies, and I think no matter what space you're organizing in, or if you work in a nonprofit, or if you work at some sort of org, it's like this is just sort of like foundational work that I find to be really essential parts of everything else.
Thank you, Lex. J. Stephen.
Yeah, I'm an actor, playwright, former producer. Was based in New York for most of my adult life and then relocated to LA in 2018. And at that time, my activism sort of lapsed until spring of 2020. And I'll talk about it more later, but it was actually a fellow actor that inspired me to find my way to White People for Black Lives, which then led me to restorative justice, which led me back to theater. And now I teach circle practice for theater organizations.
We have just an incredible panel, and I just want to say that there's so many amazing people in the Fringe community and in the theater community at large that are building community together and trying to dismantle white supremacy. And it's so cool to see that, especially as we kind of go through like a swift change that's happening in the theater community. And we're just so excited to have it here. I don't know what I'm saying. I'm going to go into the next thing, which is that we are going to do a grounding exercise because I need it. Lex, would you mind facilitating that? Oh, sorry, Emma.
No need to apologize. Okay, so yeah, we're gonna just do some deep box breathing exercises. And if you're not familiar, it's intentionally breathing in, holding your breath, intentionally breathing out, holding your breath, and just getting really focused on the breath and how it feels in your body. So we'll do this 4 times. And I'll count as we go. And you're welcome to, well, most cameras are off. That's fine. If you have your camera on and want to turn it off, of course, do what feels comfortable. Okay, so let's first take a breath in for 4 seconds and really feel the air, fill your lungs, fill your belly. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then hold it for 4 seconds. try to avoid moving that breath in or out for 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale through either your nose or your mouth for 4 seconds. Feel that air leave your body. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then hold it as your body is empty of that air for 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. 2 more. Breathe in. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Last one. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Back to
you.
Ellen.
All right, I'm going to start a little screen share here. Just give me a second to present. Okay. So today we're going to cover some common questions, such as why are we centering white folks in this conversation? What is white supremacy? What is anti-racism? And what is my role in ending white supremacy? And what does this have to do with theater? This is what we're going to kind of cover in the next hour and 45 minutes. I'd love to jump in with some community agreements if we want to start off there.
So I'll start and then popcorn to someone.
Yeah.
First agreement is be curious, open, and respectful. Let's call in members, not out. Emma, do you want to read the next one?
Number 2, no one knows everything, but together we know a lot. So let people finish their thoughts completely before we move on to the next topic. J. Stephen, do you want to do the next one?
Yeah, I love this one. Use I statements. Can you help me understand? I don't understand. Steer clear of I feel.
Next one is listen and share space. It is just as important for us to hear out our fellow community members as it is for us to speak up and be seen.
We speak in draft in these rooms. We can't be articulate all the time. Give the benefit of the doubt and ask questions if something seems off in somebody's response.
Speak from your own experience, not the I have a friend mindset.
Everything said here is to be presented as a learning and reflection opportunity. You do not have to be perfect here.
If you want to share information or resources outside the space, let's ask permission from the speaker before doing so. Throw things in the chat and things like that, but try to avoid unmuting yourself until there's some space to do so. And the last one that I'm going to also name is, when in doubt, feel free to reach out to a staff member via DM. Lois and Wiley are here for y'all. And also you can always reach out to support@hollywoodfringe.org if you're watching this recording and something comes up to you and you want to be able to talk to a fringe. We're going to drop a couple of resources into the chat, which includes the LA Theater Standards, which is a list of standards that you can enact to uphold anti-racism in your production, created by and for Angelino theater makers. It is an incredible resource and one that we are so lucky to have here in Los Angeles. Hollywood Fringe is one of the signers, and so many of our participating companies are as well. We're also going to drop into the chat something, and we're going to talk through both of these resources, the characteristics of white supremacy, which is a great starting point to read into white supremacy and develop your own relationship to it in and out of the rehearsal room. We're going to start going through quickly, and we're going to popcorn it again, some definitions that are from the Los Angeles Anti-Racist Theater Standards. Thank you all so much for letting us use them. And that way we can kind of ground ourselves through the conversation. I'll go first. AAPI is an acronym for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, sometimes used interchangeably with APA, Asian Pacific Americans, or API, Asian Pacific Islanders.
Anti-racism, to put it simply, is the active and ongoing practice of recognizing and combating racism, whether on an individual, institutional, or systemic level. It must be active, as it isn't enough to not be racist. We must be proactive and intentional in our dismantling of the racial inequities all around us. It must be ongoing, because anti-racism is not a permanent identity, but rooted in what we are doing or not doing, supporting or expressing in each moment.
BIPOC is an acronym for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, which gained popularity in 2020 as a way to center the unique experience of Black and Indigenous erasure within America's history. While language is constantly evolving, there is no one term that everyone agrees on. For example, some people prefer BIPOC, some prefer POC, People of Color, some prefer People of the Global Majority, and there are others as well.
EDI is an acronym for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. You may see it elsewhere as EDIA, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Accessibility, IDEA, same words, different order, or EDIB, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Something is fully in my way of me reading. There we go. Identity conscious casting as opposed to colorblind or color conscious casting. Identity conscious casting, to quote casting director Victor Vasquez, is about making space and embracing how actors and artists can bring their whole identities or even parts of their identities to a process, to a character. We're not saying that character or casting is blind to those parts, but we're also not saying that it's only color that we're conscious about. We can also be conscious about someone's rejection of gender as a construct, somebody's queerness, someone's abilities, whether neurological or physical. That's what identity conscious means to me, and that we are inviting and welcoming, that we are actively and radically making space for all of the different ways that actors exist in the world. We will drop that link at the end of this because I have that link somewhere.
Harm, the suffering, loss, pain, and impact that can occur both in conflict and in instances of abuse, as well as misunderstandings steeped in differences of life experience, opinions, or needs.
Marginalized community. A marginalized community, sometimes referred to as an underrepresented, historically excluded, and or frontlined community, is a group of people who are denied equitable political, economic, cultural, or social access due to their identities. This marginalization could be based on race or ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, physical or mental disability, body size, age, language, economic status, immigration status, religion, systems impacted status, or a number of other factors.
Producer. Los Angeles has a unique theater ecosystem, one in which many of our theater producers are not producers in the typical sense of the word. LA has a strong history of artist-driven models and other alternative creation techniques. At the end of the day, somebody, or a team of people, selects the project and is ultimately responsible for the success and well-being of the project and the artist. Anywhere in this document we refer to a project's producers, that's who we mean.
PWI. PWI is an acronym for predominantly white institution, and that refers to any institution that has a predominantly white audience as well as artist base. Lex, you want to go into the next one?
Forgot that was me. SWANA is an acronym for Southwest Asian North African, to be used in place of Middle Eastern, which has colonial Eurocentric origins.
White supremacy. While often associated with extremism and hate groups, the term white supremacy also refers to a culture of beliefs, values, norms, and standards that perpetuate social, political, historical, and industrial white dominance, or white as the default. These insidious characteristics of white supremacy culture are often adopted by organizations as norms or standards without ever being actively named or chosen. These include, and we'll talk more about each of these as well, these include perfectionism, sense of urgency, defensiveness, worship of the written word, paternalism, either or thinking, and objectivity, to name a few. While this document largely addresses these harms, it's critical to acknowledge that instances of violence, harassment, threatening behavior, hypersexualization, fetishization, and use of racial slurs still exist within theatrical institutions.
There's a couple of definitions we also wanted to add to this, which include Mina, which is something that some of our artists prefer, and sometimes it's also Swana, and Latine, which is a gender neutral form of Latino, Latina, and intention versus impact, which is really important here at Hollywood Fringe. Intent is what you aim to achieve through an action, and an impact is how that person or community receives that action. The impact of an action does not always match the intention, and good intentions don't always result in a positive impact. Although our intention is not to hurt someone, our actions sometimes lead to harm. We dove through those really quickly, and we're going to dive through some more definitions, and then we're going to get more into this like conversation. But we really wanted to center everybody and be able to come from the same thought process here. So while we're going through the next definitions, we have some questions for the audience to kind of write down. Remember, we asked you to get those pens. And you can also just think about them if they're helpful to you. But it's taking 2 minutes while we go through these to kind of decide which of these characteristics of white supremacy resonate with you, and which of them might be difficult for you to express or make you feel something. So we're going to go through these as well, just in that same popcorn kind of situation. And if y'all could kind of start to think about which of these characteristics resonate with you. Fear. White supremacy culture's number one strategy is to make us afraid. When we are afraid, we lose touch with our power and become easily manipulated by the promise of illusory safety.
Denial and defensiveness, the habit of denying and defending against the ways in which white supremacy and racism are produced, and our individual or collective participation in that production.
Either or and the binary reduces the complexity of life and the nuance of our relationships with each other and all living things into either or, yes or no, right or wrong, in ways that reinforce urgency, one right way of perfectionist thinking, and abuse of power.
Individualism, our cultural story that we make it on our own without help while pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps, is a toxic denial of our essential interdependence and the reality that we are all in this literally together.
One right way, which is along with perfectionism, paternalism, objectivity, and qualified. The belief there is one right way to do things, connected to the belief in an objective perfect that is both attainable and desirable for everyone, connected to the belief that I'm qualified to know what is perfect right way is for myself, and that perfect right way is for others.
Progress is more and quantity over quality. The assumption that the goal is always more and bigger, with an emphasis on what we can objectively measure as more valuable than the quality of our relationships to all living beings.
Worship of written word, honoring only what is written, and even then only what is written to a narrow standard, even when what is written is full of misinformation and lies, an erasure of the wide range of ways we communicate with each other and all living things.
Urgency, applying the urgency of racial and social justice to our everyday lives in ways that perpetuate power imbalance and disregard for our need to breathe and pause and reflect.
Right to comfort and fear of conflict, the internalization that I or we have a right to comfort, which means we cannot tolerate conflict, particularly open conflict. So as we move forward, I think we're going to use these definitions to kind of ground ourselves in conversation. And the next thing that we're going to kind of move into is this discussion of personal stake. I was supposed to keep sharing there. Although it sounds counterintuitive, developing your own personal stake in ending white supremacy is a great tool to become an anti-racist theater practitioner, an organizer, an artivist. What's your personal stake? We're going to define that through a share, and I'd love to tap Jay Stephen to share with us his perspective.
Jay Stephen, you're muted.
Hi, sorry about that. But you're about to hear me talk for a really long time as I share my own personal stake in anti-racist organizing and in anti-racist art. What we're talking about when we say personal stake is organizing out of mutual interest, which means recognizing that we as white people are also harmed by white supremacy culture. Understanding our personal stakes in collective liberation keeps us connected to that work and to one another through difficult, sometimes overwhelming times. Knowing my own relationship to racism and systemic inequity has kept me going in this work and has also continued to inspire me as an artist. And far from being a burden, has been really liberating for me. There are so many ways to be in this work in anti-racism, especially as artists. There's a place for absolutely everyone. So I'm going to tell my story now. I'm going to be reading it because that helps me keep organized and not get too emotional about some pretty intense stuff. So I do want to just send up a care flare before I start that I'm going to be touching on some topics that may be intense for some people, including substance use and incarceration. So do what you need to do for you to hear those things, and I thank you in advance for receiving them. So I often say that my anti-racist journey began in May of 2020 after hearing of the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, when a Black femme friend, a fellow actor, told me in so many words to come get my people. That made me feel defensive. I thought, those aren't my people, but then I realized maybe they are. And I had no idea how to do what she was asking of me. But it really started much earlier than that. I grew up in suburban Texas where good white boys pull themselves up by their bootstraps. I was both an overachieving, gifted, and talented kid and a drama club misfit with a punk rock haircut. The day I won a scholarship for my writing, I was in detention for smoking in the parking lot. I was in AP courses and brought home trophies for speech and drama. I also snuck out to get wasted. And I was gay. When that bit of news broke, my mother told me that she wished I was on drugs so she could send me away. So away I went, as soon and as far as I could. And while my depression, anxiety, and predilection for substance use followed me, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps and got myself through college, where I was very much the star of my acting program. I was barely out of school when I was given an absurdly large grant to create my own work, which was the beginning of my self-producing in indie theater decades ago. I was barely out of school when all of that happened, but I was also self-medicating my feelings of worthlessness around my sexuality, and within about a year, I was on the streets, unhoused, addicted to heroin. I needed help, and all I had were bootstraps. I found myself trying to navigate a social welfare system that left me no choice but to engage in crimes of survival, eventually dealing dope myself, which led to multiple arrests and stays in county jails. Being strip searched was humiliating and violating. I will spare you the details. And I learned very quickly how racially segregated any incarcerated population is, and how vulnerable queer people are to violence and coercion. I couldn't afford private rehab, but when I disclosed the daily price of my habit to a social worker, I was told that I had too much money for public assistance. My only recourse was to present at an ER with suicidal ideations, which was not entirely false. So I was in and out of psych ward detoxes and county-run rehabs that provided no continuity of care post-release. But it did give me an up-close view of the inequity of our healthcare system. Inside these places, my respectable suburban upbringing didn't matter anymore. I was a burden on society with no community ties and a casualty of the same system that had for so much of my life uplifted me. Now disposable, worthless, lost. But while I was tackled, pushed around, and made fun of during arrests, no cop ever drew a weapon, even when I was exhibiting what was surely erratic behavior. In lockup, I fully resented the assumption that I'd aligned myself with white nationalists, but I also recognized that doing so would have afforded me protection. And while disclosing my sexual identity would make me vulnerable to abuse, I could easily pass as straight when I needed to. In the hospital, when I had a panic attack, it was a pair of social workers who calmed me down. No one tased or strangled me. No one shot me dead on the spot like the LASD did to Nicholas Burgos in October of 2020. Later, reporting every day to a methadone treatment program was not exactly the glamorous life I'd imagined for myself. But I also quickly learned how easily an articulate, well-mannered white boy could get his needs met, debts forgiven, and offenses expunged. And when I faced prison time on a felony conviction, I was able to amass the resources to hire an attorney and buy my way out. Instead of going away for 7 to 10, I found myself in the DA's office where a prosecutor, a Black woman in a wheelchair, looked me in the eye and asked, "What college did you go to?" NYU. She stared at me hard for a long time before granting me a conditional release. Eventually, I fought my way back to a career in the arts. It won't surprise any of you that the work of queer actor playwrights is not all that highly valued in our society. Of course, on balance, my work is more highly valued than that of queer actor playwrights of color. So I look for ways to align my anti-racist values to the work I do in theater, television, and film. I now have a certificate in restorative justice facilitation from the University of San Diego, and I lead conflict resolution processes in arts and activist spaces. I teach workshops in circle practice for theater organizations and advocate for alternatives to incarceration with Justice LA because I know firsthand that the prison industrial system has failed us all. I've been drug-free for 20 years. I have shelter, food security, and a few dollars in the bank. I have health insurance and can manage my depression and anxiety. I live in a state where what rights I have are relatively well protected. But as an actor and writer, I see white supremacy at work every time an artist I respect and admire is overlooked or exploited because of race, gender, body type, or disability. And I too suffer for crumbs from companies that profit off of my compliance, that exploit my vulnerability, that fly pride flags and pay lip service to inclusion and diversity, but glorify cop culture and stand idly by while our rights are stripped away. That's racial capitalism. And it impacts us all through wage theft and labor extraction. One of the most useful things an anti-racist artist can do is join a union and be an active member. It's also really important that we have a say in municipal budgeting. I can connect you with organizations that make that easy. Arts funding is transformative justice. As artists, we're conditioned to believe that we're disposable, that work is work, and we should gratefully take whatever we can get, regardless of whether our project aligns with our personal values. We dare not rock the boat, even to ask the organizations we work for what systems they have in place to prevent and address harm, or to question whether land acknowledgement is enough when we could actually be amplifying First Nation storytellers in our performance spaces. It's true that outside of self-producing, we don't have much control over our careers or hold that much influence on the entertainment business in general. But we do have the power of refusal, at least to some degree. Unlike actors of color, I'm not stuck playing one-dimensional gangsters and terrorists. I can leverage my whiteness to advance anti-racist narratives. It may not transform the industry overnight, but I think it helps. At the very least, I sleep better at night. And yes, that can come at a price. Turning down auditions for racist, misogynist, homophobic projects and being vocal about it cost me an agent, which was traumatic for a minute. But I found a new rep and strengthened other healthier professional relationships. And since then, playing racists in anti-racist stories, using this look to uplift immigrant voices has sort of become my thing. So don't tell me there isn't work for white guys. I believe that every artist has a personal stake in dismantling oppressive systems. You don't have to be Black or queer to be impacted by the increased censorship of so-called woke content across this country. Artist or not, none of us really wants to see our needs weaponized against historically marginalized people for the personal gain of a privileged few. It's no accident that those who perpetuate and benefit from racial capitalism also tend to be anti-gay, anti-trans, anti-subsidized healthcare and public education, anti-union and affirmative action, anti-abortion, anti-voter rights, and anti-art. That's why I'm anti-racist. My husband and I owe our liberation as gay Americans to the intersectional organizing of Black and brown trans organizers of decades past who were fighting for the lives of the unhoused and the addicted, the sex workers and the artists. Anti-gayness stems from misogyny, patriarchy, and ableism, all of which are rooted in white supremacy culture, all of which come down hardest on Black women. Women like my friend who kindly but very firmly told me to come get my people. I said earlier that I didn't know how to do that at the time. After our conversation, I literally Googled white people help Black people Los Angeles. That's how I came to White People for Black Lives. Of course, help is not what my friend was asking me to do. For decades, Black leaders have been calling not for philanthropy, but for partnership in building a better society for all of us. In prioritizing my values, I'm helping to create a world where each of us has our needs met in the first place. That means refusing to uphold a system that devalues anyone who exists outside of a white, European, heteropatriarchal, false ideal. It started with saying Black Lives Matter and continues with a deep understanding that my freedom is bound up with those lives. It took me a while to begin to understand that, which is not entirely my fault, but it is now my responsibility, and it is also one of the greatest joys of my life. Thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you, Jay Stephen. Thank you so much for sharing with us and for bringing your amazing story to us, for bringing your amazing community building power to this space. And we're going to now all have a moment to reflect on personal stake. I'm going to actually have us go into breakout rooms. And so I'm going to assign people. There's going to be 3 different breakout rooms and you'll be assigned. So when you get assigned, if you could try and go inside there, that'd be great. And then if you are having trouble, let me know and I will help you get into that room. Just one second. Okay, I'm opening all those rooms. If you all could, if you're having trouble getting in, let me know. And our facilitators will walk you through a couple of questions. And I will walk you through here on the live stream as soon as I have assigned everybody to their rooms. Macquin, would you like me to help you move to another room? Wiley, do you want to go into one of the rooms?
Sure, I can go to one of the rooms.
Okay, do you know how to, or do you want me to move you to one?
I can go.
Okay, yeah, choose your room. All right, for my friends that are watching.
Hey, Ellen, I'm sorry. Hey, you know what? I'm not gonna be able to join the room. It's okay if I just hang here
Yeah, no
with
problem.
sound. All right, great, thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, so for my friends that are watching on the live stream, what we would love for you to do is to journal for the next 20 minutes on personal stake. And so when you are writing your own personal stake, which is so important for beginning your journey into anti-racist work, is to figure out why am I doing this? Why am I doing this in a way that isn't white saviorism? How am I doing this in a way that allows for collective liberation instead of coming from just my perspective? And so what I would, some questions that I would journal on in the beginning of this is what comes up for me as my personal stake in white anti-racism work, and how do I hold my personal stake together with what's at stake for others. And so if you could take these next 20 minutes to journal on that, then we're going to come back and have a facilitated conversation about how to bring this into the rehearsal room.
Hey, Ellen. Did you clock the time that we went into these breakout rooms? You're on mute.
Oh yeah, we're 5 minutes in, and so there's 15 minutes left.
Beautiful.
I'm gonna broadcast that in halfway
Fab.
when we're halfway through time.
Beautiful.
Thanks. For any of you watching on YouTube or the recording, we have 2 minutes left on the timer for you to finish your writing, and then everybody will be brought back into the room. As people come in, here are some more journal questions that we invite everybody to journal on this week. Welcome back, everyone. As we wait for everybody to come back from their rooms, here are just some more questions that we invite people to journal on this week. Welcome back, everyone. As we come back, these are just some other questions, and they've been dropped in the chat as well. We invite people to journal on this week, but we're going to get started and bringing this back to creation, bringing this back to the rehearsal room, bringing this back into collaborating with others, and specifically in theater. So I'm going to bring back the panelists. Sorry, I'm not very technologically savvy all the time, so give me a second as I do this. Boom. Oh, and I lost me. Hello. Hi. Taking a deep breath and kind of switching gears, but I want to dive into bringing this work into theater spaces with some moderated questions. And the first one is, after doing this personal stake journey, it can be hard not to center ourselves in multiracial spaces. How do you approach anti-racism practices and questions when you're not in fully white organizing spaces and bringing it back into the work that we do in everyday lives? If anybody has a calling to answer this, feel free to unmute and share.
I can start. It's really simple, I guess, for me. It's just listening, actively listening, and really not sharing unless I'm explicitly asked to do so, or if it's to try and seek maybe more clarification or more understanding, because I've found my point of view is often heard and shared. And so in those spaces, I really want to hear everyone else's experiences.
Absolutely.
I would also like just add that I think like these kinds of questions I think change based on relationship. Like and like where you are in your own journey. Because I think like listening, like Emma was saying, I'm like, hell yeah. And like I think that the gift of like being on an anti-racist journey in a real way is that you do start to develop your own deep analysis. And like I remember like being at the very beginning of this and like just defaulting to anyone else. And like I had no thoughts of my own and was like, I'm a white person, I'm always wrong, right? And like I think that that is kind of just part of the journey. Like, I think there's this sort of like unraveling that happens, and there's a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. And I think that is a very, very, very normal part of the process. And like, you know, as you get deeper into relationship with other people, I think you get an opportunity to like share more of yourself in like a real way that is like a give and take. And I think that can be helpful to think about.
Yeah, I think a lot about the fact that theater practitioners are storytellers, and we're in spaces where we're meant to be sharing our stories, and yet so often we don't. And part of that has to do with the white supremacy aspect that we call urgency, that we don't actually take the time to build relationships because, you know, time is money and we have to make work and get butts in seats and move on to the next project. And that's unfortunate. And because of that urgency, I find myself sometimes in multiracial spaces with this terrible impulse to talk about my work as an anti-racist, or to say, you know, that I work in restorative justice and everyone needs to know that I'm one of the good ones, right? Like, as a white guy who looks like this, I want to make sure that people don't feel threatened. And so I want to give my anti-racist, you know, bona fides so people know I'm not a threat. I have to actively resist that. Like, that is actually part of the work. And if I do and sit back and listen, as other people have said, eventually, you know, the opportunities do open up for discussion. Usually as artists, we build relationships that hopefully have open channels.
This isn't a question that I wrote down, but it's something that's coming up for me, which is, how do you deal with making mistakes? Especially when it comes to beginning this journey. I feel like the longer I've been going through the journey, the more mistakes I've made and the easier it's become. But what are some techniques to kind of move through that feeling?
What is the oath? Does anybody know oath? Own it, apologize. Oh, I don't remember it. Does this ring any bells? I
Take
wonder what,
accountability.
take accountability, maybe. And I'm not sure what the F is, but it's probably something about finding a way forward, right? So, yeah, own it, apologize, take accountability, and find a way forward. I like systems. I believe that there are systems, but probably the O is the most important in that.
I think it's, oh, sorry, Lex, did you want to share first?
I was just gonna add, like, I'm like, learn your nervous system. Learn how your nervous system responds to discomfort. And it is not gonna be perfect, and you're not gonna have all the answers all the time, but like, I just think doing that sort of like somatic work, like really understanding what happens in our bodies when that stuff comes up, learning like, do I get defensive? Do I attack? Whatever your responses are, I think can be really helpful. Because like there can, right, it's like, well, I had the best of intentions. And so like, like whatever it is will come up. And I think understanding that means that there is more room for like a breath and a moment of like, do I need to say what I'm about to say, or do I need to shut up?
I was also gonna offer, similar to what Lex was saying with like the journey, and I do think some like shame and guilt and feeling like you should be somewhere where maybe you're not yet faster. Like you should know better sooner than maybe you feel like you do. At least I felt that way. Practice, I almost said practice makes perfect, but practice helps. And I just feel like it's inevitable that will happen. And just knowing your nervous system, like Lex said, and getting more comfortable, it becomes easier, I think, because it's almost like exposure therapy. And you realize like, oh, the world hasn't ended because maybe I felt misunderstood or I said something that I didn't understand that offended someone else, yes, address it and learn and change your behavior going forward, but it will be okay.
We talked a little bit earlier about intention versus impact, which is so important to think about in anti-racism and also in creative spaces in general. And sometimes when I've made a mistake, I can actually use that to voice something, like to actually say, oh, this is what I intended, this was the impact and to actually talk through that. Whether you're sharing that with the other person or not is something else. But sometimes being able to identify those things can be helpful.
One last thing I'll add with that is decentering yourself when you are owning it and taking accountability, because there is a big difference between trying to do that so that no one's mad at you anymore and trying to do that to repair the harm that's been done. And the second one is really what should be the focus, and that requires decentering yourself to care for those who were impacted.
What tools and practices do you use to reduce harm in spaces that you're in and or navigate conflict when they arise? Is there anything that you would do in the rehearsal process? Say you're a producer, so coming from kind of a producer's hat, I am the leader of this team. How can I kind of put some practices in place, or things like that?
Circle practice. This is my jam. This is also my opportunity to uplift Nicole Brewer's anti-racist theater work. If your organization can book Nicole Brewer or any of her colleagues in to lead an anti-racist training, you should. Part of what Nicole does is help organizations and individuals find their anti-racist ethos, which is a step beyond the mission statements that everybody has on their websites, right? To actually make something actionable, to have goals, meet them, and set new goals around this work. But the other thing is, I believe very strongly in circle practice. A lot of us now are doing check-ins and check-outs. That's one level of it. But we can also use circle practice to build community and to address and prevent harm. Again, like as storytellers, we have opportunities to use systems to address the issues that we're all scared of dealing with. Even when like the work we do is about those issues, somehow we will skirt them. And getting in a circle and talking about this stuff from prompts opens all those doors. So that's my number one thing, like as both an artist and a former producer, and to the administrators that I talk to in this work, I think circle practice does a world of good.
Can you give us a little bit of like a debrief on what circle practice is and how you've instituted it?
Sure. Sorry, I get excited and get ahead of myself. So circle practice is an aspect. Oh, thanks for dropping that, Wiley. Circle practice is an aspect of restorative practices, or you may also know of restorative justice. It is a tool for sharing our feelings and our views on things by literally sitting in a circle and going around and sharing things. So sometimes that is a check-in circle at the start of a meeting or a rehearsal, just to see what everybody's bringing into the room. Sometimes that's really practical stuff, like if people are coming in with injuries. Sometimes people are coming in with trauma. But rather than checking any of that stuff at the door, we actually can bring it into the room and build trust among the ensemble by sharing it in a systematic way. The pushback that I get is we don't have time. We don't have time for this. But I see again and again and again companies that institute this regularly and consistently, they make more and better work because they don't get snagged up by harm later, right? This is harm prevention. I also think it's a way you can use more extensive circles to build community. I teach ways that you can do that by using art-inspired prompts, like whatever you're working on, you can actually bring the issues into the room. So I always say, if you're doing a play about gentrification, you can take some time to do a circle about our relationship to gentrification, or you know, whatever your work is about. And then finally, we use circles to address harm, like when someone has made a mistake or when someone has caused harm in the room. How can we gather together to talk that out and figure out a way to go forward and make things as right as possible, which may or may not mean that people part ways. Sometimes it means that like we can move forward together. That also doesn't have to be exclusive of a zero tolerance policy, right? Sometimes, like you've spoken about how in Fringe you may have to institute that kind of thing, but you can also have processes of repair. And in my experience, that happens best in a facilitated circle. I hope that made sense.
No, it super did. Thank you so much for sharing. Does anybody have anything to add about like harm prevention and strategies in the rehearsal room to kind of set yourself up for success when navigating conflict? I would also say for Fringe, really honestly, following the anti-racist theater standards was such a great way for us to center our conversations. It was to be like, how does this relate back to our larger strategies of having an inclusive company? And so for people who are building, not just for Fringe, some people are building like, I'm going to have this company that does things multiple times. Being able to institute that practice now just means as you scale up, because there's going to be things in those standards that are not going to apply to you right now. You're a Fringe show. You're all people who are putting up your own money, making things out of blood, sweat, and tears, and we get that. But I think building yourself up so when you do have that success in that next path, you're already kind of set up with an anti-racist framework and with making sure that you're keeping up with what is the standard practice of the industry in Los Angeles. I wanted to talk a little bit too about anti-racism and casting, and I'm going to drop in the chat. Wiley found the link that I did not put in there, and I'm going to drop that in the chat as well for identity conscious casting. But what I would love to talk about is like how you bring anti-racism into your casting practices. How do you go about practicing or casting in a way that brings harmonious understanding of your practice into the rehearsal room? Anything around casting. I'm calling on you.
I'm in a little bit of a unique situation because I've mostly done one-woman shows where I am the casting director and the cast. But I am also working on some more ensemble work, and it's basically been looking at who my first thoughts are. Like if I'm not doing an audition, which so far I haven't done auditions personally, I'm reaching out to people. It's like noticing who am I reaching out to? Who are the people that like instinctively I'm going to first? And are they all white people? If they are, then I need to change that because I want to have a diverse set of artists in the room creating work because I know that our work will be so much more dynamic. And I don't know what the other and I was going to say. I guess mostly dynamic. So that's it feels like really simple. And sometimes I feel a little weird about it because there's a part of me too that's like, am I trying to find like token cast members to just check a box? But doing things like circle work that Jay Stephen was talking about really helps ensure that it's not just making sure that we have the people in the room that we need to have just to feel good about what we've done, but truly we're coming together in a way that's going to be beneficial for everyone and have great conversations and make cool art.
Anybody else have anything around casting?
I mean, I am like not a casting director. I don't cast anything, but I think just like, at least from like an actor's perspective, I feel like I really appreciate when, like breakdowns are really intentional. And it's like, is it important that this person be Black or Jewish or gay or have a disability or whatever it is? Like, I think that at least when I was in grad school and I was casting short films, like I did sort of start going about it in this very like colorblind way. And I think that like that's not quite right. But I think that being very open, at least what that did allow for me was like I got to see a lot of people that I wouldn't have expected, and then ended up like casting people that I didn't expect to see. But I do think like, you know, I think it's important to think about the like cultural implications of like the story that you're telling. And I was cast in something I remember once where like it became very clear to me in like reading and rereading the script that I was like, oh, I think it's really important that this character be an actual like Jewish actor, and like I'm not Jewish. And I like chatted with the director, and they were like, you know, I hadn't really thought about that, but and like it meant that I lost out on a role that I really liked, but I also was just like, this story will be better if told by someone with this experience. And so I think it's just important to think about those things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I also just dropped in the chat. We have a whole article that our access committee put together about equitable casting and like the impact, and starting with how you can cast equitably and foster an inclusive environment after casting. And so I think it's really important to just kind of start to think about these things, but there are all these resources out there. And so I think what's really cool is like you're not here in this room to learn everything, but it's more to for us to all be like, oh, these are the things I should start to Google. These are the things that I should go to trainings about. These are the things that I should ask other people about, be in conversation with people at office hours or at the fringe events. These are conversations that should be happening, you know? And I think that that's sometimes a part of it. I see that we have a question. Is it about casting or is it about something more general? Yeah, go ahead.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, just curious, like, because I know a lot of us are also writers, so you know, we are writing the stories that are going to be produced and made. So, like, for me, for example, I'm Sam, and my solo show is Sam, but this is about other projects. Like, but when I write things, they're usually from my perspective, and I, as a white person, am like the main character. And I've had a lot of like conflicting feelings about that because of course I want to write what I know. So I'm writing from my experience. But I was wondering if you guys had any like tips about like, you know, obviously integrating other like stories and cultures. And I guess maybe I can answer my own question, but like maybe bring on other writers, like to, you know, then have other experiences. And maybe like it's not just the white person show, maybe it's more of an ensemble kind of thing. Just wanted to see if you guys had any like just tips or ideas about that, I guess from like the also the writing part, because in turn that would be casting too. Yeah, hope that's relevant.
Yeah, this is so hard. Thank you for asking about that, Sam, because this is I think an ongoing question for a lot of us. As a playwright, this has been a real issue for me over the years because um, I've begun to feel like the stories that mean that I care about the most maybe aren't mine to tell. And when I look back on some of what I wrote, uh, because I was doing something that you're talking about, where like I was writing about issues of race and culture, but also knowing that I could only do it from my own perspective, which necessarily centered a white male voice in those stories. Um, and I regret a lot of that. I did eventually find ways to collaborate with uh, actors who would be playing the roles. And when I was collaborating directly with the actors who were going to embody these characters, that changed things. I think the next leap is to understand that, like, then that becomes not my work exclusively, that becomes something more like a collaboratively written piece or a devised piece. And that means that like my idea of what a playwright is has to change based on who I'm working with and what I want to create in the room and in the world, more largely. So, like you said, bringing on collaborators, I think that we are looking at maybe creating new forms, new ways of making theater that reflect the kind of world that we want to live in. And that means that like the old way of writing and producing plays maybe it goes away. But it means that for someone like me, like I'm still figuring it out and have really pivoted to just acting because I'm not sure how to be a playwright and tell the stories that mean the most to me. And is it better for me to just step aside and uplift other voices in whatever way I can? Do I actually do more good for our, for this craft by maybe taking a step back? It's an ongoing question for me. So that's not a tip. I didn't help at all, but that's just what I was moved to say.
I can share as a fellow white person making solo work about themselves. I fully understand what you're saying, and have felt that very much too. And some of the things that I've done is I try and also write about things that are interconnected with anti-racism, but as kind of like what Jay Stephen mentioned, but still very connected to my experience. So that includes mental health. It includes general ableism, feminism, intersectional feminism, anti-capitalism, and um, I also have made a point to, I don't think this absolves me of anything, but I guess it makes me feel better. But I acknowledge the identities I hold in that space as well. And the other thing that I guess kind of helps me feel better or okay about centering myself in that way as a white artist is the people in my breakout room heard this, but I really try and center self-love and self-acceptance in my work because I truly believe that if you're able to truly love and accept all the parts of yourself, you are more open to loving and accepting all the parts of everyone around you. And I think that is also a necessary component of this work, is because we don't want to discard anyone. And if we love and accept them, it's a lot harder to discard them. So those are the ways that I've tried to hold all of that.
Thank you both for sharing. I want to talk a little bit about challenging, like when people challenge you on your thought process, when you challenge others on their thought processes, when your goals don't align. How do you deal with this without derailing a whole rehearsal process or without kind of going into a panic? And how does that kind of differ with those in more like power positions? Like, do you have different conversations with people? And how does that power dynamic kind of work in a rehearsal room? It's a complex question that I think has many answers.
Well, for one thing, sometimes you just gotta derail things. I mean, I don't know. And I think like, I do think it becomes really complicated when like people have a lot of power over you and it's just a like a matter of like how much are you willing to risk, and that is a personal question. Um, but I also think that like I am not perfect at like challenging people. I have a lot of anger and things to work out. But like I think a really helpful tool for me in those conversations in a way of like navigating my own like feelings about it has been to like really, really try to come at these things from a place of curiosity and like and not like a challenge curiosity like really I'm asking this question so I can like attack you, but like I really want to understand your point of view, and so like could you explain to me like why you think this should be cast in this way, or why this should be rehearsed in this way, or why this story should be told this way. And like I think that asking questions and really coming at it from that kind of place can hopefully usually like diffuse the like heavier bigger feelings that can like derail things.
Yeah, I've definitely derailed a few times. Like with the best of intentions, and then like in some cases made things worse. I like the version of I statements where you say, when I hear this, I feel that, or you know what I mean? Like when um, I like using that kind of a system, but I also think that it's really important that organizations have systems for conflict resolution. And so when I'm going into a room, I want to know what there is, and it has to be something more than like, the head of a predominantly white institution saying, my door is always open. Like that's not real. That's not a system. Because in the absence of protocols, I think that derailment is almost sure to happen. But I also think sometimes maybe that's okay, and maybe that's how change happens. Or maybe I never work at that theater again.
I really do think that is so true, though, is that having systems is so necessary because conflict does arise. And I think showing up, and I loved earlier, we talked a little bit about like a community ethos. Fringe has a community ethos because to us, we had a code of conduct for a really long time, but that was just really not what we were trying to say. It was beyond a code of conduct, beyond don't do things that are illegal or don't do these things that are going to harm others. It was more about this is how we approach work as like a whole. This is how we want to make sure that in a space, because Fringe is so we're uncurated, open access. Anybody can do whatever work that they want here, which means that we have a lot of diverse perspectives, and we often have more women producing than men. We often have more. We often have folks with disabilities producing at Fringe. We often have a very diverse community, which is starting to lean more and more over every year, less white. When we started our anti-racism work, the Fringe was white as fuck. It was extremely white. And it is in the last since 2016 has really upended to being really only about 50% last year. So we're starting to look more like Los Angeles County. And in that, we really wanted to make sure that everybody knew and was coming in saying that that's how we want the community to look. And we wanted to go even further. We want it to look like all of Los Angeles looks. And I think that I think that I want to talk a little bit about what resources have y'all used to build maybe some of this language? Are there people that you have kind of referenced? I know that you've dropped a few of those, Jay Stephen. Is there anyone else that we wanted to kind of uplift for our starting points? We really, I don't know, we really use the LA Anti-Racist Theater Standards. It's like a big part of it. We really did a lot of work with our access committee. We have like a whole board that has worked with us since 2020 to like really institute organizational practices. I don't know. What are things that we can do on smaller scales though, and like the individual production level? It's a rambly question. But
This isn't so much on the production level, but like on an individual like anti-racist journey level. These organizations like White People for Black Lives, Showing Up for Racial Justice, Aware LA have had and continue to have workshops and like seminars that aren't just single day things. But the way that I got involved was through a program called Accountability Teams through White People for Black Lives. Lex was actually my pod leader. That was how we met. And that was, I think it was like an 8-week program where we really dove deep and got to know the people that we were in our little groups with, to talk about really personal things. And it just became more comfortable to share resources and ask questions over time. So if you can either create or find that sort of cohort space to share those things, I think that's really, really helpful. Yes, that is the end of my thought.
I wanted to open it back up to questions. We have about 30 minutes left. We have like 3 or 4 questions, but I was wondering if anybody in the room had questions or things that had come up or things about their individual journeys they're going on right now at the Fringe. And if you think of one, throw them in the chat because we can start to kind of go through that. My next question is a little bit about how we approach conflict resolution while centering safety and security of those most often harmed through systemic issues. So not interpersonal relationship, but maybe but something or well, with an interpersonal relationship, of course, but not with only white folks. So when you're dealing with people who have maybe faced harm, how can you kind of approach that with that lens?
When you say, sorry, I just want to make sure I'm hearing correctly. How would we approach a situation where someone directly has caused harm in a way that resolves it and doesn't like discard? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's about approaching when people cause harm while also kind of being able to hold the reasoning behind why they might have caused that harm, whether that be like kind of outside influences that have happened because of like systemic issues, whether that's something that is more personal to them. How can we center that in conflict resolution? And that can be for white folks, it can be for non-white folks, but I think that they're a little bit different of conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I already talked a little bit about restorative processes. I'm going to say it again, though. I just think that it's really important to engage in those kinds of things, and and there's a lot of different ways that that can happen. So I facilitate conflict resolutions for theater organizations, and generally that is a full community circle, what I do, uh, with a lot of different perspectives. And what people learn over and over again is whatever the incident was, whatever the harm was, impacts people from different communities in different ways. And people hear each other in ways that they haven't before. Very often, by the end of a session or that process, people are coming together to find solutions, right? And sometimes it's systemic stuff, sometimes it's infrastructure stuff. Like, oh, we need a lock on that door. Because you know what I mean? Like sometimes it's really simple stuff, but because it wasn't addressed, it caused trauma to different people in different ways because of different identities. Then there's also facilitated processes where it's a more one-on-one situation, or a single artist who has been harmed by an institution. And there have been some very famous cases in the last couple of years of that sort of thing, where people were harmed by their employers in a theater situation. And when it came down to it, they needed to be let out of a contract. And that was the end of the process, because by that point, it is too late. You know, I think that we can use the same processes that we use to address harm to prevent it and actually get ahead of those things.
I also like, I don't know how pertinent this is to like rehearsal space exactly, but like, you know, I think about this as like a personal example, but I'm like, I had this like nonprofit job where like there were some like very transphobic things happening, and like sure there was an HR department of like one person, um who I had no idea like what her level of understanding around transness was. And so I'm just like, in that scenario for me, and I like, it would have been really helpful to know that there was somebody in power or in leadership that like had some sort of base knowledge of what I was even talking about, which would have facilitated like me being able to maybe deal with what was happening, instead of just being like, I'm just going to hide from this person the rest of the time I work here. um so I don't know if that really answers the question, but I think like having someone who like is very clearly knowledgeable and like has the resources and like capability of holding those things with nuance and understanding and empathy could radically change how conflict gets handled.
From the chat, we would love to clarify what an I statement is and maybe give some example about I versus we and where some of these might be helpful or not. Anybody want to jump in about I statements?
I mean, in
Go
like
ahead.
nonviolent communication, there's it is a sort of formula, and it's like, it's what Jay Stephen was saying, is like, when I like, the idea is that it be like some sort of observable kind of neutral event. So right, like if I like come home and the sink is full of dirty dishes, I'm not going to be like, when you don't wash the dishes. Instead it would be like, when I see a sink full of dirty dishes, I feel blank. And so like, and in that, like we're really intentional about naming real feelings, not what could be called faux feelings, right? Like betrayed, silenced, bullied. Like these all are not necessarily like feelings. They're like sort of like feelings that imply an action based on somebody else's behavior. And so it's like when I see this observable event, I feel sad, angry, helpless, alone, whatever it is. And then the next part of it would be a request. And it should actually be a request, like not a demand, not like a coercive thing, not like manipulation, not there's consequences if this request is not met, but like based on like these needs that I have, like, is there a doable request that you are able to do to meet that need? I hope that was like complete.
I just drop those in the chat too for people if they want to kind of read more about that. It's really a great starting practice to be able to use within your own lives. I've tried it and I fail at it sometimes too, because but it really, when you're able to communicate in that way, it can really help you be able to move through a space where you feel heightened. Because the truth is that I think we all have to name like theater making as a side job after we all, like everybody in this room overworks. Everybody that does Hollywood Fringe overworks. And so it's really hard to maintain a sense of what's real or not when you're in a heightened state. And I think that what's so important for me when I to realize as I like have moved through so many different spaces to be like, okay, I really, really need to make sure that I'm extremely centered because I know that I have a dysregulating job. And it's just true when you work under a system that the arts or 900 Los Angeles has the #1 amount of independent artists, and we are the least funded city in the United States. It is a really, really tough place to do this, and it is easy to get dysregulated when you are working against such impractical systems in the arts. And so I think being able to center kind of these like more easy practice, these like not easy, they're really hard, but these practices that you can lean on, these systems that are flexible. They're not black and white systems, they're gray area systems. I don't know. It's been very helpful for me personally as I've navigated through taking on a leadership role and things like that. I'd really love to touch base a little bit about we talk about community so much. How has anti-racism helped you build community in your own life?
I feel like, and again, my breakout group heard this too, but oh no, I shared this with everyone at the top. I feel like it helped me find community in a new city because it was through like I moved here 6 months before a pandemic, and then I was obviously isolated for a very, very long time. So it was not easy to meet people or see how I could plug into any work. And joining an anti-racist organization introduced me to people that I knew my values aligned with, and I knew shared, I guess I want to say values again, but like the things that were important to them were important to me, and it was inspiring to want to try and build a better, more equitable world with these people that I was in community with. And like I said, Lex and I met like 4 years ago, and we're still friends, and it's so great. And I feel like it is also a perpetual like network that just continues to grow in a really beautiful way the more you show up. And I think that's also the key, is just showing up. And there have definitely been times where I pull back because I feel overwhelmed. And every time I start showing up again, I'm like, oh yeah, this feels really nice, because I feel really supported and held and understood with folks who are also doing this work.
Yeah, I feel like when you're among people who are all fighting for collective liberation, or when I am with a group of people that are all whose goal is collective liberation, I don't have to fracture myself as much as I do in other spaces. I can bring all of the different aspects of myself. So I can be someone who is systems impacted and in recovery and queer and an artist. I don't have to be any of, just some of those things that I am in other communities, that I can be all of those things at one time, and trust that that strengthens ties rather than dissolves them. That's how community is built for me.
I was like quite literally talking about this to another one of our pod members, Piper, who was part of our initial pod with Emma, who's another dear friend. And I was like, there is something about like, I just was like, having the community that I have now that is all working toward collective liberation together means that I'm like, there was like this feeling in the past that I had of just like perpetual aching loneliness that is gone. Like, I'm like connecting with people in this way that is like, this is so outside of all the ways that we are taught to connect, like with people who are doing mutual aid work, who are participating in collective care and moving away from individualism. I'm like, that has done incredible things for me as a human connecting with other humans. Like, I'm like, it has taught me a completely different way of conceptualizing my own self-worth. Like, I've been the recipient of mutual aid in some of these circles because I have mental illness and needed help. And like, being the recipient of that and being like, oh, I don't owe anyone anything for this. It's just like, this is a group of people who are like, you're a human who deserves like dignity, respect, and care by virtue of being a human. And like, those people are also my friends. And like, what better friends could I have than that?
I love it. Do we have any final questions that anybody might have? And while we do that, could our panel, while anybody is kind of like thinking of their final questions, could our panelists shout out some ways that people can further their learning and plug into maybe some other spaces around Los Angeles? We're going to uplift the LA Theater Standards as well as Blacklist, the accountability org that works to make Los Angeles theater better. We have Antiracism Daily, the-art.com.
I mean, I don't have like links on hand, but I think that if, I think of like anti-racist work, and we talk about this a lot in White People for Black Lives as kind of like these two like different channels. Like, there's like the white anti-racist identity development piece, which is essential. And then there's also like, how am I making material change in the world, like particularly around race, and like creating a more equitable world. And I think in terms of the identity development, like Aware LA is a really, really great resource. There's Saturday dialogues every single month. You can go regularly, you can pop in. It's a really like loving, welcoming space that is designed for white people to mess up and like ask questions and overcome perfectionism and develop a vocabulary around race. I think there was someone when I joined White People for Black Lives that said, when a white person and a person of color or a BIPOC person are in conversation about race, it's like one person who's like at basic algebra, like talking to someone who knows like advanced calculus. And that would like stuck with me. And I was like, whoa. And it really is a practice of like developing that. And I think Saturday Dialogue is an awesome space for that. And then in terms of actions, like, I'm always gonna pump up White People for Black Lives. Come join us.
Yeah, I would second all of that that Lex said. Thank you. I also would uplift a couple of other action spaces. I'm a big believer in local action, in getting involved in like city and county level budget justice. And I know that's not sexy, but we can make a huge impact by speaking out in support of local ballot initiatives and like county level legislation. So I'm gonna put in Arts for LA, which does advocacy work around budgeting for LA. Some of you probably know that organization. Maybe some of you know Ricky Abeles, who works there. Ricky's amazing. And then the Justice LA text actions. I'm on the virtual action team for Justice LA, and we send out text messages a couple times a week that provide people with really, really easy actions for doing things like submitting written comment to the LA County Board of Supervisors. It is mostly about decarceration and alternatives to incarceration, less about arts, but it is a way to get involved with local politics. Oh, I love this link that Lex just dropped. That's awesome.
I
And
did that training during the pandemic. So this is like an ongoing thing in the Bay by Catalyst Project. And Ann Braden is a sort of well-known white anti-racist, was like working through civil rights, a lot of other things. But there's this program. I actually don't know how it normally is run because it's an in-person thing where people come from all over the country to the Bay. But I did it over Zoom because it was during the pandemic, and like it connected me with organizers all over the United States that I am still connected to. And it's really, really in depth. Like you go into your family history and like whether or not how your family benefited from white supremacy. It's how I learned about Palestinian liberation. Like there's a lot. It's in depth. It's a commitment. And it's so worth it, and it's like totally transformative.
I'm just echoing what both Lex and Jay Steven said, and I added the Aware LA links. And I know I'll leave it at that. And one more that I'll add right now is a much shorter intensive. It's just 4 sessions, which is the Unmasking Whiteness Institute. And that is a series to help white people deepen their own self-awareness and build community with other white people talking about race in this kind of container. The next one has started, like they just started one, but they've been doing it on, I don't know right now if it's quarterly or like twice a year, but that's another available option.
The last thing that we're going to do is drop some into both chats on Zoom and YouTube is some reading lists that both the panelists as well as Fringe have collected over the years, and make sure that y'all continue that work. We are so glad to have seen you here. We feel so lucky to see so many of our artists take this seriously. And for all of you showing up, thank you so much. For all of you that are watching on the recording, thank you so much. It's really, really a great way for you to make sure that you're going to have a good Hollywood Fringe experience and that you can build community with each other. All right. I'm going to take us off. We're going to leave a little early, about 10 minutes to go have a nice extra little bit of sleep or maybe cuddle with a pet. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
thanks, everyone.